as home.
Yeah.
How was that process preparing the girls for coming back to the U.S.?
Well, we had come back at the end of '92 for 3 months, so Stacy had a little sense of, okay, she remembered something about the U.S., but it was just a visit with Grandma and Granddad and other family members, and then we came back. So when we were telling her that we're coming back to the United States, she's saying, that's good, but when are we coming back home? She just felt that Zimbabwe is home.
Okay, wow, beautiful.
Now she's a grown woman. She's 32 years old, and she's also a pastor and married and doing really well. Sarah's now 35 and studying to be a nurse and getting ready to start her career, and they're both wonderful young women, and I think their time in Zimbabwe shaped them to become who they are.
Awesome. Well, please let them know that they got a lot of big brothers, the big sisters from the basketball family, as well as the Hartzell and Old Mtare students that are really happy to hear that they're doing well in life, married, and doing great things here in America. One interesting point I wanted to mention in there, I think we discussed this offline. I think you said when Stacy was in grade 2, she was the top Shona student.
That's right.
Of all the grade 2s at the CP primary school.
Yep.
That's amazing. That's amazing in itself. All right, so 94, I'm sorry. For basketball players, it was a tough year for us. Once we found out that coach, you were leaving, and on top of that, we found that Coach DeWolf was leaving. Yes. We knew that the devil was working hard to depress our minds. But I mean, we all appreciate that you guys invested a lot of time and energy and effort. I think you guys had the foresight to kind of start preparing us for possibly not having a coach immediately, or maybe not even having a teacher in charge, after your departure. And one of the amazing things that happened, which, was always brewing around that time, before you guys left, some of the players and some of the former students were already coming back to help with coaching. Like I know Tendai Kudina, around that time, when he was a student, he helped to coach a lot of the girls teams and the junior boys teams. Gladman Chikwanda did a lot of refereeing, but he helped as well. And I know in '95, when I came back, after you guys had left, and I came back for A-level, Wimbai Darikwa, who lived on the mission, he was my coach. And then Chenji Chamba that came back to coach. Whenever Gwinyanya Majio was in town, he'd come and help. Munyarati Nyananda was now at African University. He'd come and help. Farai Chizungu. I mean, all these, former players, Tendai Kudina, when he'd just pass by the school, he'd stop by and help out in a practice. So I think all you guys helped to develop this culture of, learning what you can, reaching back to help your fellow brother, your fellow sister, and it was just a culture that has still was passed on to a lot of different students at Hartzell. But when you left, we were horribly depressed. And also, if you remember, that year we dominated Manicaland, and we were preparing to go for the Leyland National Championship in Bulawayo. And then what happened?
We knew you were going to win it all. All of the pieces were coming together. And then some of the elders on the team understood that the rest of life was at stake with the exams that were coming up. And if I'm remembering correctly, made the decision, we need to not go. We need to stay and study. And from a standpoint of knowing the priorities in life, you're exactly right. And I know that Coach DeWolf and I were saying that to you. You are exactly right. And we were saying to each other, Oh no! They have passed up the championship.
Yes.
So you want the best for everyone, and sometimes you have to choose between the best. And,
Yes.
Thank you for making the right choice. I know it was hard, and I think you all know, as we did, I think you would have won it, but you did win it because you were already mature in your thinking of having your priorities correct in life.
Well, thank you for the kind words. Looking back 20 something years later, I'll be honest, I was on that team. There's a little part in my heart that has some regret because, it would have been nice to raise that championship trophy. But, school was definitely a priority. But we left one on the table, let me put it that way. And I don't know what school won that year, but there's a part of my heart that just wish we could have just woulda, coulda, shoulda. But hey, a wise decision was made with the future in mind.
Right.
So in '94, the whole time you're in Hartzell at Old Tare, basketball was just a small part of your greater mission that you came to Zimbabwe for. I want to take a little time just to talk more about some of the work you did beyond the basketball courts, the stuff you did in the community with African University. If you wouldn't mind taking some time to elaborate on some of that work.
Right. I remember when we arrived, the headmaster at the time talked about 16 stations, preaching stations all around Manicaland, and that I was now on the preaching circuit. I told him I had never been trained. I couldn't do that, and he said, "That's okay, you'll learn. You're now on the preaching circuit." So that was a part of the responsibilities I never knew were happening. I was appointed officially as the architect. My training was in architecture, so I was appointed as the architect for the conference in Zimbabwe, the United Methodist Conference. And there are many building projects all over the country. But mainly, we were appointed and invited to come to Zimbabwe because the church, the worldwide church, had determined that a university needed to be built on the continent of Africa, sponsored by the United Methodist Church, and they needed an architect to be a liaison on behalf of the church. So at the time, it was illegal in the country to have a private university. It could only be a government university. And so for a year or two, we were simply going through the negotiations, the political work, Dr. Karewa, of getting that approved. And once it was approved, then we were told almost overnight, the university needs to start in 6 months. There were no buildings, and there was no infrastructure. And Dr. Karewa said, here we go, make it happen. And there were some abandoned farm buildings that were across the valley, and very quickly we started lining up building teams from the United States who would come for 2 weeks at a time to do construction work on the buildings. At the same time that I was trying to draw up some plans as ways to repair and to renovate the existing buildings that were there, and then at the same time the infrastructure was beginning to be laid out. There were some British architects who were hired to provide the plans for the permanent buildings. And so it was a coordination of a lot of people coming and going, being in charge of the actual construction, and at a time when we were in the midst of a tremendous drought. Many of you will remember. And the water sources were drying up, and we were also in desperation asking for boreholes, money for boreholes to be drilled all over, which we were able to do. And then at the same time, there were a number of rural congregations who came to me to be able to say, God sent you here. As an architect, that means you build buildings, and you're supposed to help us. We'll never be high up on the list for the conference church, but we're ready to build now. And so 4 different churches, and 3 we were doing simultaneously in 1994, having built three churches. So on a regular schedule, day after day after day, I was going into town buying bags of cement, taking it out to the sites, and having conversation about what stage we were in and what was next. So reaching for some panels.
So sorry, Mrs. Reavis.
Oh, this is good. This is
Mrs. Reavis gets covered up here. So we helped to build Nyamajura and Gichera and Yaramvue up in Yanga. Those 3 were on a big circuit, one of the dust roads that it would take the entire day to go from one to the other and bring supplies. And I would make the route on a daily basis, but bringing supplies to one of the 3 each day. And we moved some of the construction equipment. We had a big arch. I don't know if you can see this one, but a big arch and construction supports to build the arch. That was a component at each of the 3 churches over the chancel altar area. But as soon as